But why don't we kick off with the opening comments, as it were? So welcome, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Jessica Metheringham, and I am the chair of Unlocked Democracy, which is UD for short. So welcome. Lovely to see you all. This evening we're discussing change from within. So I'm joined by two politicians who are trying to do just that. So on one screen I have Luke Pollard, who's a Labour Member of Parliament for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport. The other screen I have Zack Polanski, who's a Green London Assembly member and indeed the party spokesperson on democracy, I believe. So welcome to both of you. What I'd really like to do is just have a conversation about change from within. You know, what are you doing at the moment? What would you like to do? You know, what do you think works? So let's all chip in, let's keep it really relaxed, but let's start by introducing ourselves. So if I could ask Luke first to just say something quickly about himself, then Zack, then we can get chatting. So Luke, let me pass the ball to you.
That's great. Thanks, Jess. Hello, everyone. My name's Luke Pollard. I'm the Labour and Cooperative Member of Parliament for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport, which is an awful lot of words. What I am is I'm a Janner. I'm proud to be from Plymouth, the last Janner to represent Plymouth, who was born here. You might have heard of, he was a young and up-and-coming chap a while ago called Michael Foot. I'm a big fan of cake, and I believe that our politics is utterly broken. Up until Monday, last week, I was in the Shadow Cabinet as the Shadow Environment Secretary, and I'm now enjoying a little bit more freedom to be able to make a case for some of the radical reform that we really need to make our society work better in a fairer, greener way. And one of the things that we should be doing is fixing our broken democracy, and PR is part of that. It's not the full answer, I don't think, but it's part of it. And I'm looking forward to having a chat about that shortly.
Brilliant, thank you. Let me then throw the ball to Zack on the other side.
Ball caught, which is the first time I've had any dexterity, thank you. My name's Zack Polanski. I'm a Green Party London Assembly member. I chair London's Environment Committee, and I'm also, as you said, the national spokesperson for democracy and citizen engagement. And I think just in opening comments to introduce myself, I'd start here that I just came back from COP26 last month, and I'm sure most people on this call totally agree with the scale of the emergency and we need to do something urgently. Now, as a Green Party member, I obviously agree, and the planet is absolutely something we absolutely need to be looking after as custodians. However, having a democracy is exactly part of that. And when people sometimes say that proportional representation is not a priority because we've got to save the planet, or we've got to sort out our healthcare system, or we've got to have fair and just policing, all those things are true. But we can't do any of those things properly and sustainably until we have a democracy in this country. So I'm really glad that people have chosen to spend the evening with us talking about democracy, because I really think, especially this week of all weeks, as we see democracy crumbling around us, it is so important that parties can get together that share progressive values, and even parties sometimes that don't share progressive values, if they want to have a democracy, because it really needs to be at the forefront of everything we do.
Well, thank you very much for both of those comments. You know, that gets us straight in. Just to add things that you might be interested in about me, that I used to work for the Electoral Commission, that I now do a little bit of workshops, a little bit of political consulting, but I mainly design board games. So that's my day job. Plus, of course, doing the chairing for Unlocked Democracy. So with that segue, let's talk about sort of, you know, where we are at the moment on this. So Luke and Zack, you both represent different parties. You're the elected representatives for different parties, whereas this campaigning group is called, of course, was created by Charter 88, merging with New Politics Network. You know, we campaign for a better democracy, which is supported by a written constitution. You know, we're thinking about, you know, how can we get a better democracy? What does that mean? What bits do we need to include? So things about electoral reform fit right in there. You know, what are the foundation stones of us actually getting a much better system? Now, about half of our members belong to a political party, so clearly the other half don't. But thinking about, you know, those half that belong to political parties, you know, they come from all sorts of different parties. So let's think, I think, first of all, about what you two are currently trying to do within your political parties to bring about change. You know, how does that work and how simple a task is it? So if I could go perhaps now to Zack, and then Luke, you do chip in, and let's not be afraid to be a bit messy in terms of this. So Zack, over to you.
I feel like I've been tasked now with being a bit messy. So this question is perhaps much easier for me than for Luke, and I don't mean that as a barb at all, and I'll explain why. But the Green Party is fully behind proportional representation and have been for a long time, as have the Liberal Democrats actually as well. So I think in terms of what am I doing? Well, in some ways, what I'm doing is working with organisations like Unlock Democracy, like Make Votes Matter, like Get PR Done, lots of civil society organisations across the board actually, to look at how do we get proportional representation. And over again, Labourism is the problem. Now, I've chosen my words there carefully. I don't think necessarily Labour is the problem, and I'll explain why. We know that the majority of Labour members support proportional representation. We knew that before there was even a vote, but I imagine most people on this call will know that the Labour conference recently voted in overwhelming numbers in terms of the membership for proportional representation. So I think the argument there has been won with Labour members. Two arguments really. One is the less important argument to me, that I don't think we will ever see a Labour government in this country again unless Labour get behind proportional representation, because at the moment the left is split, and unless we find some ways for people to come together and campaign together, I think we're going to keep seeing successive Conservative governments. However, the second is, I think, much more important, which is proportional representation in and of itself is the right thing to do, because it means that everyone gets a fair vote, everyone is included. And we see around the world lots of examples where there's unusual benefits to proportional representation. For instance, countries with PR have carbon emissions on average of less than 18%. We see more BME or people from ethnic minorities elected under proportional representation, and more female representation too. So all of those things are important. However, the reason why it didn't get through Labour conference was because of the trade union vote. Now, I want to be really clear here. I think we need to be very careful that we don't blame trade unions. Trade unions are a hugely important part of our democracy. And to be honest, if we had proportional representation and we didn't have trade unions, I'd like to think we'd be having an Unlock Democracy webinar right now about the need for trade unions and why workers need representation too. However, some of those trade unions internally of themselves have very old undemocratic systems and ways of going. So all of this needed leadership from the Labour Party to sort all of this out before the vote, to be working with the trade unions, to be working with the links, to be working with the members. And Keir Starmer has very much been missing in action on all of these issues. Now, I don't want to go much further down that road because I don't think people tune into this.
We've got more time anyway.
Well, exactly.
We don't have to do
you don't want to hear the Green Party bashing Labour. It's just too obvious. But I do think that there's been a huge missing vacuum of leadership here, and we really need to get this sorted and soon.
Well, you've stolen most of my my best lines about what PR is a benefit for. So, having done that, so that has opened it up with a little bit of a sort of, a sally to Luke and saying, oh, what's this for, for Labour? So, Luke, it's probably up to you to come back on that.
Yeah, no, really happy to. I mean, one of the things that really annoys me, and it has done for quite some time, is that actually as the left of politics and the centre of politics, we've found new and ingenious ways to find new divisions between us. I imagine myself and Zack agree on probably 95% of stuff that is the same. And suddenly, as politicians, we'll find a way of making that 5% something that we need to die in a ditch over, that we need to fight each other really passionately about. And that has contributed, I think, to the mess that we're in, where we've now got a united right, with the Brexit Party UKIP vote having been swallowed up by the Conservatives, and a much more split left. So I want to see a majority Labour government. I really do. I'm a Labour person through and through, but I'm also a big greenie at the same time. And I think that we're going to achieve the change that we need when we work with each other and when we stop throwing stones at each other. And I think the way that we can do that is, firstly, do that within your own party. And secondly, do that with parties that are nearly aligned to us and to our values and our beliefs. And then thirdly, make sure that when we're doing that with people we fundamentally disagree with. Myself and the Tories, well, we're not natural bedfellows, I have to say, but I want to encourage those voices on the Conservative benches to do the right things on the issues that really matter. Like the Conservative Environment Network, for instance, has had some really big changes relative to the Tories on their benches, winning greener issues, which previously the Tories weren't a big fan of. So we need to find a way of working together a wee bit more. And to do that, we've got to find a way of making arguments that fit the language and the culture of our own organisations. And so for me, that means making the case within Labour and within the Labour movement for a better way of doing politics. And I think you've got to start with the context about where we are. And our politics is broken. You know, we can't accept that tinkering around the edge is going to be enough to solve this. We are literally approaching a crossroads in our democracy where the options ahead of us are pretty grim. If I'm honest, we are facing quite a dark future. So we do need to, I think, be bolder in making a case for better, because often the case for PR is that this is a better system. Well, it may be a better system, but I worry at the moment that we are not choosing between an okay system, but we don't really like it, and a better system. We're choosing between a defense of our democracy that needs major surgery to keep it going and potentially losing much of our democracy, the gains that we've got there, the culture of coming together, of challenge, of nurture, of debate, and we're losing that. And so within my own party, we've got to make that case. And Zack mentioned it, that we've been getting good progress in this space here. We now have 325 constituency Labour parties that have passed a motion in support of PR. 97% of constituency Labour parties that have debated that PR motion have gone on to back it. We've got a huge number of people supporting proportional representation. And importantly, we have some of our union friends starting to move in that direction. Unite have come out against first past the post, and we're seeing some of those changes, perhaps some other big unions as well. But I think the way we make this debate needs to be framed within our own movements, because when we work cross-party, which we absolutely must, we must find ways of agreeing more with each other and disagreeing less with each other, especially those on the left, if we are to stand a chance of defeating a Tory government. But we also need to find a way of agreeing with ourselves more about how we make arguments within our own parties that then doesn't allow politicians, because we're always tempted to do this, to go, oh, by the way, I'm right at the end. Whatever it may be, I'm the best bit. Look at my party, aren't we the best bit? And you know, it's tempting, it's built into our DNA, it's part of the adversarial politics that we have in Britain. But we do need to, I think, take a step back from some of that and realise that the risk that we are facing is so significant to our democracy, to the type of change that we want to achieve. And the changes in our democracy have already been so significant that more of the same will not deliver the change that we need.
Yeah, no, thank you. There were a couple of things that sort of, really struck me while you were speaking there. And one of them is about the framing for different audiences, which always seems really crucial to me, because we've got to speak to the people. So different groups, have different types of ways of framing things. They don't quite speak different languages, but you get people from very different perspectives, and quite often they will look at the same thing, and sometimes they'll make completely different decisions based on it. So looking at things like the policing bill going through at the moment, and you listen to some of the peers who are talking about it, and you're like, wow, you're recognizing the situation, you're recognizing some of the really divisive things out there. You're deciding that the answer is to be tougher. You're deciding that, the answer is to be worse. How is that going to help? And I don't doubt their conviction on that, but it feels like sometimes there's just some real missed communication there, that it's like, hang on, actually, we are completely on, we're on different sides of the argument, but also we're not framing it right. So there's definitely something about how do we speak to somebody else where they are now, which is very useful. You know, when you're in different parties, it's about, you know, how do you frame it for the people who are in your party? And I think you're right there, Luke, that, you know, that people who are in Labour are best talking to Labour. But also then, how do we come together as a movement as well? You know, how do we be one movement when we're trying to fragment the message there? So I don't know if anybody's got any answer to those very garbled thoughts there.
So I think that what you're saying is absolutely vital. And you said not quite different languages, but of course, sometimes we are speaking to people with different languages too. There are completely different communities, I was going to say in London, but across the UK as well, in all different areas. I think some of this is about how we view power. My very first day, or my very first time that I got to question Sadiq Khan and hold him accountable in the London Assembly, the first question I asked him about was citizens' assemblies. I was aware that I'd been elected on a big mandate that was particularly about the climate emergency. And also I spoke lots during the election about how I wanted to bring the voices of Londoners into City Hall. And obviously the equivalent would be the voices of anyone into Parliament in the UK. And Sadiq's response to me was that I was in danger of making myself redundant. Now, I'm not saying that as an attack on Sadiq, because I think there's lots of Labour politicians like Luke here, for instance, I would imagine do support citizens' assemblies. But I do think there's a culture shift in politics generally, and it's not just limited by party division. I think it runs deeper than that, about who has power, who's willing to share power. And part of that is linked with the voting system, but I think more importantly as well, it's reflected across the whole gamut of changes of what this Conservative government want to destroy, whether it's the policing bill right now, the elections bill, the judicial review. I mean, you can't look without, you know, seeing disaster coming down the tracks. So I think we've got to have more trust in people. And I think some of that has been dashed from a very divisive referendum a few years ago that seems that, you know, division seems to have continued. But I think ultimately for me, it comes down to, if you give people accurate information, if you show trust, if you have integrity, if you demonstrate integrity on a consistent basis and you build that trust again with people, then you can trust people to make those decisions and still be held accountable as a politician, because ultimately the buck will stop with you, but you will be listening to people more and engaging people more. And I think across politics, for me, that's something that's really missing at the moment. And again, particularly with the events of this week and everything that's going on, trust is certainly not building and getting better. But that doesn't mean we give up on these things. It means we need to go harder and make these things happen.
Yeah, I think I agree with quite a lot, as Zack said there. I think there's sometimes a challenge about what the sequence of what we argue for. And certainly one of the big critiques within the Labour Party about arguing for PR or citizens' assembly is at this very moment in Plymouth, a third of our kids are in child poverty, and there'll be kids going to bed who haven't eaten. So do we spend our time talking about changing a constitutional affair, which is very exciting for a very small portion of the population, or do we do that? And I think that binary option of do you do this or do you do that can be a distraction from the debate. The answer in politics is always and rather than or. We always need to do more than one thing at the same time, which is what actually makes politics so difficult. And then politics becomes about what choices you make, rather than, you know, do you do just this thing and then what's next? And I think part of that is about when we talk about renewing our democracy, if we start that conversation that says, hey, proportional representation is amazing, let's talk about that. You know, most people I represent, I don't think have a strong view on proportional representation, but they might have a strong view on decency in politics. They might have a strong view about trust. They might have a strong view about whether you should have a Christmas party when you're in lockdown in a tier 3 and then lie about it for an entire year. And well, they certainly do, because my inbox reflects that. So sometimes the way we frame our debates needs to be more inclusive in itself. And that's also where sometimes I think there's a temptation to bundle everything all together and say, we've got to have all of this. And so proportional representation is often seen to be a bit like a table. It exists, it's one thing. Well, there's lots of different versions of PR, and even proponents of PR can get themselves in quite a nerdy fight with each other over which version they really want. But actually,
that divides us more than it unites.
It does, yeah.
We end up being divided, like you said at the beginning, the left ends up divided.
Yeah, and I mean, I've certainly got views of which one I prefer and the bits I'd like, but I would, instead of saying, oh, we need an STV top-up system, I would say, I want to keep a system where a community has someone that represents them, and so they've got a clear person they can go to, and then there's a proportional bit to make sure that everyone's vote counts. And so it's just a different way of doing it. But the reason I just want to mention about the sequencing is because sometimes people assume that because you like PR, you like a citizens' assembly. And again, citizens' assemblies exist in different forms. And certainly the Labour Council in Oxford, I think, have really demonstrated how a citizens' assembly can be really successful and really useful. But it doesn't automatically follow that people who want electoral reform are always in favour of citizens' assemblies and vice versa. But part of the debate that you've got to have around some of those bits is, well, if everyone did have a say in a representative citizens' assembly, would you get the outcome that you want? Because there's sometimes an assumption on the left that more people involved with politics produces more outcomes that we like. And certainly there's an element of truth about that. But there's also an element where it might not. And so within this debate, we also need to make sure there's space for leadership, space for people to take a stand and take people with them, to challenge existing thoughts, to be different. And I think when we're making the case for democratic renewal, making a case for trust and decency in our democracy, we need to recognize that sometimes putting all the ingredients into one mix might make a really, distasteful meal. But what we do need to do is talk about why we want it. So why do we want it? Because the government's broken. It's corrupt, it's full of liars, and they've literally spent a year hiding their broken lockdown rules while giving out multi-million-pound contracts to their mates, right? That's why we need to renew our democracy. That's why we need a different democracy. That's why simply having automatic voter registration, although something I really want, won't in itself solve the problem. So we have to frame our debates within our different parties, but we also have to make sure that, this debate doesn't happen in the absence of some of the public looking in on it. So when we do that, I think you've got to, and Zack's examples he used earlier, I really quite like, having a proportional system means you get better at the end of it. It's not just because in the abstract it's better, it's because the results can be better. But I think also we need to make sure that it's part of that renewal process. Our politics is broken. Here's a way of fixing it. And if we explain it in that type of plain English approach, I think we'll win more supporters, but you'll also win over some of the people who are a bit hesitant, might not have a strong view on it, but need to be convinced to take a step towards it.
So that started to answer some of the questions, because we've had questions about, so how can we show voters that PR would help them in their lives, for example. I think that, that starts to answer it. But we've also had questions about whether people understand PR, and I think that's really important as well. But sorry, Zack, I jumped in there when you were just speaking, so let me throw
it.
You
invited us to be messy, so I was taking a chance. So I want to disagree with Luke a little bit, further totally proving his point earlier about politicians disagreeing when they only disagree on 5%. So I do want to caveat by saying I absolutely agree with the majority of what Luke said, and certainly can hear the good intentions in everything he's saying. The small part I disagreed with was when he said that people often think that if you involve more people, you might get outcomes you'd like. And I think for me, it runs much deeper than that. And it doesn't necessarily, not for Luke, I realize I might be being disingenuous here. But I think the more people that are involved, the more democratic it is. And actually, you might dislike the outcome. And I think we have to be okay with that. In fact, I think we have to welcome that, because the second part of the sentence that then Luke went on to was we need to show leadership. And I think that's what's so lacking in this country right now, is very often we think we can't ask the public because they might say something we don't like. So we've got to follow the public where they are right now. But you can both ask them and listen, and at the same time, and this is the bit that's missing, really make good, strong arguments for why this will make a difference to so many people's lives. And I don't just mean that with democracy, but I mean it with any issue at all, actually, that we both need to listen and engage, and also we should have our own opinion that comes from our values, from our party's values, but most importantly, pragmatic solutions that will make everyone's lives better, or at least particularly the most vulnerable people better. So with that, Luke talked about the people living in poverty in his constituency. And again, he clarified this, that it's not an either or. You can't have democracy or deal with poverty. You absolutely need to have both. But what I would push on even more with his argument is that we know that democracy will be something that aims to help those children who are living in poverty. Now, there is an uncomfortable moment here, and I'm going to fully embrace it, which is to talk about democracy. To be on this call is a privileged position. And very often it's a position that doesn't come from diverse communities or communities that come from low-income backgrounds. And, you know, I'm not going to do a survey of everyone listening into this webinar right now, but I don't imagine there's that many people living on a council estate somewhere that's remote that feels completely disconnected from power. There'll be different levels of privilege, of course, but I think we can't assume that the democratic conversation can automatically include everybody, because people do have what they would see and are bigger priorities: feeding their kids, keeping their jobs. However, I think with that privilege, it's absolutely incumbent on us who can see the bigger picture and have space and time to do this, particularly if we have access to power. And I'm not just talking about me and Luke, I'm talking about anyone on the call who feels that they can write to their MP or elected representative or get involved or run for themselves. When we have those access to powers, and I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we are improving our democracy exactly for those people who are struggling to eat. And I don't mean in some kind of paternal way that we know better, but in a way, or maternal way, in a way that is involving everyone on the ground. So we're listening to them, even if this doesn't feel like their obvious priority at the moment. And then just the final thing I wanted to say was I saw someone on the chat said that PR was rejected. And it's always the big thing that sets me off. But in 2011, we did have a referendum in this country, but it was not proportional representation. It was the alternative vote. Now stick with me, because I realize I'm getting wonky here. But the alternative vote is the alternative vote is a less proportional system than first past the post, so often results in less proportional outcomes. So it's not true to say we've had a referendum on this. And also it was in very particular circumstances with a coalition government, where it was often used as a stick to beat Nick Clegg up with for various reasons at that time. And it was 10 years ago. I think what Make Votes Matter are advocating for, and I think Unlock Democracy are probably supporting, but maybe someone can clarify that for me, is a good systems agreement. So that's essentially to say, what are the principles of a good proportional system? So we're not talking about individual systems, but we're doing broadly what Luke started to do there, to say, let's keep a constituency link, let's make sure that people are accountable, let's look at what do we need from a proportional system. And then I would advocate a citizens' assembly or a group of people to get together to look at those good kind of principles, and then start talking about what systems, so we could all get behind one system. So I apologise for getting a bit wonky, but I think I just skirted the edges of it.
That's okay, a bit wonky is fine. But yeah, just to confirm that we don't have any particular type of PR in mind. You know, yes, we might have personal preferences the same way that you might have a personal preference and Luke might have a personal preference, and I certainly have, you know, one or two things I think are, you know, slightly better than others. But, you know, we very much support the Make Votes Matter approach on that, and in fact we work in partnership with them on, you know, various things. We have campaigning for electoral reform being, you know, one of our top priorities. So it's very much a thing where we're like, yes, we need to do this. But looking over some of the questions, one thing I think, you know, that's come up in quite a lot of what you've been saying really is around whether people truly understand what we're asking for. Because actually, you know, when you're going through life, you often don't think about a lot of the things that you take for granted. And I feel like voting is one of those things that's taken for granted. You know, so I wouldn't say that I properly understand the way that the electric lights work in my house. You know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, turn on a switch. And yes, I learned it in school and I can kind of remember. And if pressed, I could probably draw a little diagram and be like, well, you know, this does this and whatever. But actually, I don't really understand it in the way that I understand when I plant things outside in the garden, for example. I really feel like I understand that personally. So I wonder what it is that we need to talk about in terms of PR, you know, starting from where we are and wanting to make a difference, wanting to get people to feel PR and to, you know, to want to change and to say, yes, yeah, this is actually a problem. Our system is broken. Wanting them to go out and persuade the people who can make the decisions. What do we have to do there? You know, how do we have to talk about it? You know, who do we need to persuade? You know, that's a big load of questions. I'm just trying to fling into one there.
If we start the conversation of how do we sell PR, how do we get more people into PR, I think we're asking the wrong question.
Yeah.
And I think there's something that I think is quite profound for me as to why campaigning for democratic renewal, a different way of doing politics, is something that I feel so strongly about, and using time on this rather than on other issues, is because the path we're on takes us away from many of the principles that I think most people on this call share. And so it's not just that a proportional system is better than first past the post. It's not just that the Conservatives, through the elections bill, the boundaries gerrymandering, through taking away the alternative voting systems that are used to elect our metro mayors, replacing them with first past the post deliberately to make it easier for Tories to win and harder for Labour to win in those situations. There is a movement in that way. And I think one of the bits that we need to learn as a movement is from our defeats, is from the fact that we haven't won stuff. Certainly as the Labour Party, we've lost quite a few general elections in a row now. And I was on the Remain side in the referendum, and we lost that one as well. And one of the bits where we have lost, and the lessons I've learned from it, is we've normally lost because the argument that I'm making is wordier than the argument that my opponents are making. Now, whether the merits of both are evenly distributed or not, and I would certainly have a view on that, the idea of, I want my country back versus I'm really a big fan of subsidiarity. It's a great concept. We should use it more often in our decision-making and allocation of resources across the continental union of nations. It's very hard. And I think we need to set our sights quite high in borrowing that. I want my country back. It's the country that we've got now that's led by a corrupt prime minister that puts lies and personal advancement ahead of the truth, ahead of the people living in poverty right across the country, is not Britain. That's not the Britain that I know. It's not the Britain that the voters that I represent know. It's not the country that we are. So one thing I think we've got to do is make a case for democratic renewal that doesn't start on line one with a deficit position, which is frequently what the left does. And Labour's really good at this. That means something's really rubbish, line one. Line two, we'll fix it by doing a thing, right? Let's start with that patriotism. Let's start with that boldness and that plain English, that actually our country is brilliant. We've got amazing potential opportunities, but we're on a path that is a bit worrying at the moment, where not everyone has a say, where people feel more distant from those people in power, where decisions are not coming out the right way because not everyone's having a say. And therefore, renewing our democracy by getting more people involved, by making it easier to vote, by making it easier to get rid of corrupt MPs doing the wrong thing, by changing our voting system, is the way forward. And that is a slightly different approach than I see from many advocates of PR, who frequently start from a situation about this is better because this is a fairer system, a kind of like Aristotelian kind of view of a democratic good. And we need that argument. But that argument doesn't work in most pubs that I go into, right? So let's start with plain English and that big picture, and then work back from that with a positive message about how this works. We'll have to frame it in different ways, but if we can do that, if we can make that proportional representation, if we can make a better type of democracy, if we can make it fairer and more accountable, more representative, with better decisions that people will recognise in their own community, then we're on to a much easier sell and a much more easier win. But without that, we're going to struggle.
Yeah. Zach, what about you?
I like this a lot. I'd almost dare I say we need to take back control. But actually, there is something about those messages that are so powerful, so simple. And I do agree with Luke, to be able to frame it as something we want or something we want to take, I think it is really helpful. I think something else I'd add is being on the London Assembly. It's one of the rare bodies in the UK, other than Scotland, of course, and Wales, where we use proportional representation. And I've noticed that young people in particular, when they come to the chamber, have responded really positively to my work in the chamber. Now, one, I'd like to think that's because I'm often standing up for the environment and the planet. But second, I think they recognise that there's a difference in the way that the chamber can operate. Now, I'm not being super naive. Sometimes the London Assembly can be as bad as any chamber with bickering and childish fighting, and I'd like to say I've never got involved with that, and I'll pledge never to still in the future. But what I really work to do, and other members do this in Labour, Lib Dems, and indeed there's Conservative Assembly members who do this too, is to find ways to cooperate, to find ways to have grown-up conversations. And, you know, I mentioned something negative about Sadiq Khan earlier on. I'll say something positive now, which is I would say we have a really good working relationship on the Assembly where we have adult conversations, where I feel he genuinely listens, that he takes ideas on board. And crucially, he often credits myself and Sean Berry and Caroline Russell, my fellow Green colleagues, with the ideas we do. And I think there's great people in this space as well, whether it's Labour for a New Democracy or Labour for Electoral Reform, the campaign group, where there's lots of people in this space who are still within their party, but actually working to make a more collaborative politics. Now, the reason why I've gone off on this tangent slightly is because I just want to emphasise what Luke said about the positive, is I think lots of people in this country are sick of politics. They're sick of seeing people bicker. They're sick of the adversarial nature of it. Now, I'm not saying that we tell them they're sick of it, because then we fall into the trap of being negative again. But I think we can present something different. We can present something more positive, more collaborative. And even this call tonight, you know, it's fantastic to share this panel with Luke, to be talking about the things we agree on and where we can go in the future. And I think people do respond to that. I think they hear something, they go, it's different. I think there's a slightly complicated thing in that we know that the most watched thing, you know, coming out of politics is Prime Minister's questions, where it's the most adversarial. So I do accept there's a slight contradiction in my point that sometimes I think the public do enjoy that kind of Punch and Judy politics, for want of a more horrible phrase. But I think essentially it's degrading us, it's lessening the argument, and it's making things worse. So I think we need to be even more better with the positive politics, to the point that it's not boring. Otherwise we fall into the Punch and Judy politics, but find interesting ways to have good, robust conversations where we can disagree, but they're more engaged and more light than shade.
Can I just build on something that Zach just said there? Because I think it's certainly true. The weird thing about being in the House of Commons at the moment is that one of the merits of making a speech in the House of Commons used to be to contribute to a debate. It used to be to have a profound impact on the views of your fellow parliamentarians that may sway their decision when it comes to a vote. The most useful thing you can do in the House of Commons now is say a few really punchy sound bites, not have a microphone dangling in front of your face when the camera's pointing at you, and then get more traction on social media afterwards. So MPs have become, our work has become different. But that also means that you can get more traction by clashes. The incentives in our system, both in terms of the parliamentary adversarial system, but also the incentives of a Facebook and a Twitter and an Instagram algorithm, is to create more division. And in that division, frequently, you can see that 5% where me and Zach will disagree being articulated in a more profound way. You know, oh, the Greens have let you down here. Look at what they've done in Brighton with these piles of bin bags that haven't been collected. Oh, look what Labour's doing here. You can see that there's a bit where it goes grrr, because that's the bit that people will focus on. And that is quite a challenge as to how we do it. But one thing, the lesson we should take from that is not that we have to be grrr to get the hits, to get the likes, to get the support that we need. I think people are very political at the moment. I think more people are interested in politics or have an awareness of politics than there has been for a very, very long time. That's because the decisions that are taken in Westminster around the pandemic, around Brexit, are so profound. And push alerts on your phone means that you get stuff more frequently. That doesn't necessarily mean that people are in favour of party politics and the behaviours of politicians. But if people are interested in politics, I think that is a door half open for people to make a positive case to go through. It's easy talking about where we disagree. And to a certain extent, we have to do that because actually it's pretty boring having a conversation where only you agree on stuff. All right. And so you do need to find the margins of where you disagree and then work out where it goes. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a muppet to each other. And the behaviors and the styles that I think politicians are leading with at the moment is really important in building that space where it's okay to disagree. Because one of the things that we need to be more comfortable with in a proportional system, where in theory there will be more parties sharing power, is actually being more comfortable with disagreeing. Is disagreeing without being disagreeable. It's about challenging your belief and testing it, finding the points of compromise, because compromise is a dirty word in 21st century Britain.
Yeah.
It doesn't sit in those camps where you fight each other, where you can divide or have your Facebook targeted ads against a certain group, where you're enlisting divisions. But actually compromise and coming together, I think, are values that are inherently British. They are things that we are comfortable with. They're part of the fairness that has created an underpinning of our democracy for hundreds of years. And I think we should be unashamed of making the positive case for that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't call out rubbish when it happens. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be bold in doing so. But it then also means that we shouldn't be muppets when we call out bad behavior at the same time. Otherwise, we're just contributing to a cycle of despair that turns more and more people off, and that makes achieving the change a lot harder.
See, I think that was what I was going to come back on, actually. I was going to come back and say, well, hang on, what does it look like to be better? Because that's a comment that's come up in the questions a couple of times. What does it actually look like to be better? And I think compromise is a really strong thing here. It's a really strong candidate for how do we know that things are getting better? And I think one of the other ones is being able to change your mind, because there's this real sense in politics that this is your opinion. You've got your opinion, you're now stuck with your opinion. You can't change your mind, that's it, yep. Forever. And that is that's not just for politicians. That's for, that's for the everyday person who's on Twitter. They change their mind, or they think that they think they want to do something different. And suddenly people are like, no, you can't do that. You've got to belong to one group. And it is very adversarial. This idea of debate as being a fight has very much become the norm on social media. So, so if we're thinking about what a better democracy looks like, then I think it's definitely one where compromise is the norm. It's perhaps, there are a whole load of systematic structural changes I'd like to make, and certainly things like the House of Lords are up there. But right now, it also feels as though the House of Lords is one of the last things
bastions, isn't it?
Common sense. Democracy. Yeah. I know, it's ridiculous. The unelected House is the one that's actually got, the most expertise and the most sense in it. But it shouldn't be that way. So, that indicates there's something really rotten at the core.
Well, so, actually, that's exactly the way it's designed to be. Yeah. The really curious thing is the House of Lords is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be a revising chamber. It's supposed to ask the Commons to think again. It's supposed to provide a pressure release valve, which is often the bit that is misunderstood. It's the space where the government can pull back and compromise, can accept amendments from people they don't normally agree with, and do so while saving face. Because the advantage of the House of Lords is no bugger watches the House of Lords. Right? They really don't.
Too much of it recently, but no, nobody does.
They really don't. So you can see the compromise, and we've seen that on, say, when I was in the shadow cabinet helping pilot the environment bill for the opposition, through where we've seen compromises, be that on water, on air quality, on other bits. It was often in the House of Lords where those amendments happened. Now, if we're arguing for reform, and I would be very happy changing the House of Lords to an elected or indirectly elected body, we need to make sure that the functions and the utilities of what is there is replaced. But weirdly, enemies of the people, as they're sometimes referred to by our friends in the right-wing media, the Lords are doing a job which is in many cases something that the Commons has now neglected to do. We have offshored our responsibility to scrutinise to those people that wear ermine at the far end of the corridor. Now, that is a weird place for democracy to be, but nonetheless, it is where we are. And so we should base our arguments on where we are today, not just where we'd like to get to.
Excellent, thanks.
Can I jump in with the role of the media? Because I think that was a really important point that Luke pointed out, that the algorithms and the media have all started to run on this clash. And I think as politicians, we have a responsibility to not feed that. So, for instance, recently I asked Sadiq Khan about a new Grand Prix that he's bringing to London. And the next thing I know in the Evening Standard, it says Zack Polanski slams Sadiq Khan about F1. And I just wrote them politely and said, I think slams is a misrepresentation. I asked them some questions and they didn't particularly respond, like they were going to change anything or do anything in the future, but I do think it's important to call these things out. And I also think there's something here about battle metaphors, because politics is full of war, of battle, of victory, and at election time, we really get on with these metaphors and they are evocative. But I certainly try and avoid them as much as possible. Now, I'm not going to say I always do, because someone will inevitably find an example in the future, in the past, where I've used it. But generally, if I'm about to do it on Twitter or anywhere else, I pause and think, how can I express this? Not in a boring way, not in a way that doesn't necessarily express disagreement, but in a way that certainly doesn't resort to violence or the language of battles. And I think to be able to avoid that language is really important. And then I think the other part of that is the word coalition in this country has become a very dirty word. Now, I'm not trying to retrace history or for whatever reason that might be, but I think we've all got work to do to say, actually, this idea that we want strong and powerful government, well, I don't know about you, but whatever colour of government, and I even say this for a green government, I don't want them to be this kind of big, ominous power that can never be overthrown or turned. I want a government that will have to be listened to, that will have checks and balances, and yes, has the ability to get things done. You don't want them to be stranglehold the whole time, but actually a functioning coalition. And we see this across Europe. There's the coalition with the Greens in Germany, and of course in Scotland, much closer to home. But actually, the media have really, over the years, managed to point this idea of coalition as a dirty compromise. But actually, when we're talking about coalition, we're talking about people working together and groups of people working together. And just finally, with that, absolutely on the U-turn business. I don't know how we get out of this, because very often, and I am looking at the Conservatives here, really, they will keep doubling down and doubling down. So then when they do eventually change their mind as a result of public pressure or opinion, they've not changed it out of principle. They've not changed it necessarily because they've listened. They've changed it because they've been forced to. So then it's very hard not to call it out, because it is a U-turn that has been done not out of principle, but because they know that they're losing political capital. Now, I think we need to be nuanced with this, so that actually when people U-turn because they've listened or they've changed their mind or they're doing the right thing, that we absolutely applaud it. And we point out the differences between that and when someone U-turns just because they've backed into a corner and they've got nowhere else to go. But as Luke pointed out before, to do this, you're starting to use lots of words. So I think one way better looks is to be able to communicate things in short, punchy ways that connect with the viewer, the listener, or even the person that you're talking to, but don't get involved with over long explanations. And that's going to be a craft that we all need to work on, to communicate in better ways that don't just become sound bites, but aren't long essays that alienate people.
Good point. Now, I'm just looking through the questions, and many of those points we're touching on, which is great, because it means that we're trying to answer bits as they come rather than necessarily going, oh, we're doing this one. But there are a couple of things that come up time and time again, and one of them is how do we reach particular people? And Keir Starmer has come up, I think, 3 times there. So, so how do we reach the people who are actually making these decisions? The second question that's coming up, and maybe related to that, is, whether PR really benefits the political parties versus the voters. So if I could throw that back to Luke first, if that's okay.
Yeah, Labour's a democratic party. It doesn't always feel like that, but we are, and we have an internal process that encourages motions and views to come up from the membership and to be passed through our various stages and discussions, and that is something that any leader, be it Keir, Jeremy, Tony Blair, whoever, needs to take note of. I think the space that Keir is in at the moment is a difficult one for any Labour leader, because he hasn't had the space to set out a stall that any other leader would have had, because he was elected during the middle of a pandemic. The vast majority of what Keir has had to speak about is the pandemic. The space for where you would normally see a Labour leader talking about health and schools and the economy and the environment has been squeezed not only by events, but also by a media appetite to only talk about health, and so because of COVID. And so we've got to make a space where this is part of that wider narrative. And I think the public do want to see big changes. The public, generally speaking, are small c conservative. They quite like stuff. We know what they like, and we have to frame it. And the 2019 general election manifesto, I think, is another moment where, for folks like myself on the left, we need to learn from it. Many of those policies in the 2017 and 2019 manifestos were truly radical and would have changed our country for the better in a myriad of ways. But vomiting complex ideas, radical ideas, upon the general public with little notice, and then moving on to another equally radical idea straight away, is not a way to build support, nor is it a way to allow your allies to come along with it. So I think where we are now, ahead of a general election, which is, we're nearer to the next one than we were to the last one. I think within the movement, we need to find a space to enable Labour to get in those spaces. I don't often think an attack on Keir is the way to achieve that. It's always tempting to go, Keir's the bad guy because he's not supporting us on this one here, right? And we've just spoken about many of those things. I've seen from some of the comments in the chat that actually we can all be tempted to move in that direction. But Keir needs to reflect what the party and what the public want to provide an election-winning manifesto to create those changes that we want to see as a party. So we need to help him help to get to a better place. And we already have the building blocks of that. We have a constitutional commission being run by Gordon Brown that's coming up with ideas. So actually there's a process that we should be feeding in with. Gordon Brown's commission should be being bombarded with positive suggestions about democratic renewal at local government, regional, national, and dare I say it, federal level, which is one of the other areas that I'm a fan of. But we do need to be making that case within there that helps take us in that direction. And I think the way we do that is by coming alongside, working with, rather than attempting to defeat another side of this argument here. And I think that is my suggestion as to how we bring colleagues on board, because the vast majority of the Parliamentary Labour Party are in favour of a proportional system. There are many people in the shadow cabinet that are also, like me, when I was in it, in favour of a proportional system, but weren't able to say so. So what we do need to do is not create this as a zero-sum game where someone has to win and someone has to lose to get that change that we need. And I think we need to find ways of allowing people to come on. And we've seen local parties do that. Even Keir's own constituency Labour parties passed a motion in favour of proportional representation. So we're not a million miles away from that. But the last few steps to help get Labour in the right position are some of the hardest ones. They are, in fact, the hardest ones since the first step when you start a journey. So we do need to make sure that we're doing so, not with big sticks, but with big hearts to win more support, to persuade and help people along that journey.
Thank you. Zack, how about you?
So I'm going to disagree with Luke lots here. Again, with the caveats though, that I think there's lots of Labour politicians like himself who care, who have the right intentions and are doing the right thing. I think we need to be honest about Keir Starmer. And, you know, we just talked about not attacking people in the language of battle. So my language is moderated for a reason. But I also think we need to recognise when people do not have leadership skills and when they've had an opportunity to demonstrate those leadership skills and have failed. And when I say failed, in some ways, no one can ever fail at anything if you keep giving them more time, because eventually maybe they will get there. But time is not something that we have right now for a myriad of reasons. Now, Luke said we've been in a pandemic, and I get that, but Jacinda Ardern, if you see her even on a Zoom call, shines leadership quality, shines a way to connect with people, shines with vision. AOC in America, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I was watching her just a few days ago do an Instagram live with no kind of preparation. She just did an hour talking about COP, and I was gripped to every word, and I felt, if this woman can lead the USA in a few years, then the country is in much better hands. And even in the UK, so I'm not being party partisan, someone like Clive Lewis, I think, I was watching him on Politics Live yesterday. I don't agree with everything that he says, but actually, fundamentally, I think his values are there and he supports proportional representation. I think Keir's had a long time now to demonstrate that he cares about democracy, or it's not one of his priorities. And I think time and time again, even when they've not really been able to take the Conservatives over in the polls. I think there's one poll recently where they're a point ahead. But with everything going on, this still isn't happening. And again, I come back to what I said earlier. One, you should support proportional representation in and of itself because it's the right thing to do. But second, there becomes a strategic political thing where you look at the situation of what's going on and you go, yes, this is new. Yes, this is courageous. But bloody hell, what else are we going to do? Are we just going to keep letting the Tories run amok as they're doing, because we're not quite brave enough to do PR yet, or I'm not quite ready to make that argument yet. You know, we really need someone to be making those arguments. So I guess my follow-up from that, and this may be the least popular thing I say on the call, particularly with Labour voters, is I think people need to look elsewhere. Now, that isn't a bash on Labour, because I'd say if Labour then starts to talk about proportional representation, then look at where your values are and support the party that most suits your values. Obviously, I hope that's the Green Party, but whoever it is, go to the party that suits your values. But I think right now, even if that's the Labour Party, they're disenfranchising millions of people in this country explicitly. So it's no longer implicit. We can no longer say it's just the Tories because they're in government. We can see that there's a route for the Labour Party to bring about proportional representation, which, to make it clear, would be to say to the other parties, let's get together, let's have some sort of progressive alliance, or at least a non-aggression pact for one election only. Let's bring in proportional representation, and then at the next election, everyone can stand. Now, I am as green as they come in terms of a London Assembly member, of a national spokesperson. I love the Green Party, and I think we've got the best manifesto possible. I should say, so I'm not disingenuous, I used to be in the Liberal Democrats, so I guess as green as they come. There was a bit of yellow in there beforehand, but it was largely on democratic issues. But even if I was running for a general election and Keir Starmer, or whoever the Labour leader was, said that is the agreement, I wouldn't stand. I'd find it incredibly difficult to stand. I would say, as important as I think it is to have Green MPs right now, democracy is more important. Let's come together. Let's get a Labour Prime Minister who's going to bring PR about, and that's got to be the red line. And by the way, this almost happened in 1997 with Paddy Ashdown and Tony Blair, but we know that Tony Blair reneged on it. So it's not just that conference motion would have been enough for me to go, yes, let's all get a Labour Prime Minister, but it would have at least been a start on the road to show that Keir was listening. But I think increasingly we've seen that Keir isn't listening. And I think it's either time for Keir to go and be replaced by a Labour leader who is ready for proportional representation, or I think voters should look elsewhere, as I really hope they do next Thursday in North Shropshire as well, because we need to get a Conservative
So that's not where I want to go. I'm just looking at the time and I'm going, it's only 2 minutes to go. And we don't want to get dragged into anything about, you know, whether Keir should not go, because, you know, we're not, well, personally, I'm not that bothered about that. This is not.
Yes, can I just respond very briefly?
Quickly.
I think Zack has inevitably stumbled on the 5% that gets him the points. The problem is this is unhelpful. If this entire discussion is about how we create cross-party alliances to make the case for PR, and I said, well, we'll agree on 95%, and here we are in the last 3 minutes, the partisan point scoring political attack has come out. This is not how we win. This is not how we come together. It is absolutely the norm, and I speak to on lots of panels with Green representatives. I entirely understand the approach. This is pretty common and normal and standard. I don't blame Zack for doing it. But if we are genuinely about this, if we really want to come together on this, we've got to make our points of coming together more significant than the points of difference. And I'm afraid that's not where we are. So let's make the case that we can make a positive case for PR, a positive case for PR. That doesn't mean we have to chuck in the partisan point scoring at the end. I want to make a positive case for PR, and I want to work with other parties to do so. I don't need to rubbish other parties in order to do that. And I think that is the better way of how we win this argument, not just with the people who believe it, but most importantly, with the people who don't. And I think that's a good place for me to end my comments.
Well, I think that is actually a good place for both of you to end your comments there, because I think those are both very valid, you know, because we are in this system which is adversarial, and that is how politics is done in this country. And, you know, I can see the fight rising in people, because actually that's where passion comes from. And I think those are one of the really valid emotions that people bring to politics, because people come to politics because they're upset about something, they want to change it. And I think that what we need to do is find a way to turn that anger and that passion and turn it into something which is absolutely positive and looking outwards and saying, you know what, let's change this for the better. Let's change it firmly and decisively. How we actually do that? Well, that's what Unlocked Democracy is trying to do. So it has been absolutely lovely to have you both on here. Perhaps, should we have just a couple of words? Perhaps if I could give you one sentence, and this is not a parliamentary sentence. This is one sentence of about 10 words. So, Zack, do you want one sentence of about 10 words, just to sort of, you know, to make your final point and to end in? And then, Luke, if you have about 10 words, and then I'll say bye.
I think democracy is inevitable if we can all get together and work to make it happen.
Luke.
Britain deserves better than our broken democracy.
Yeah. And I think mine would be something like, we need to get the foundations right before we can build real democracy. So thank you very much both for joining us. It has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you to our audience, and thank you for all of those many questions, which we picked various bits at. I was trying to see how many I could get into one bit rather than specifically doing them, but it has been absolutely wonderful. This has been a great discussion. So thank you very much, and thank you to the audience.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
everyone.